Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Veterans for Peace Annual Convention. It's wonderful to have everybody here today and to start out with this very special program. A reminder, our motto for this year is choose peace, stand up, speak out. And we know that the folks involved in the climate crisis militarism project do a wonderful job of standing up, of presenting information to the public, to Veterans for Peace members and chapters. And thank you all for what you're doing. A reminder that this convention is dedicated to Daniel Ellsberg, and we'll be speaking more about Daniel tonight at the evening opening. But this is a welcome to all of you from the Veterans for Peace Board of Directors. And thank you for being here. And again, thank you all who have been doing so much hard work for making this convention a success. It's going to be terrific. And we're starting off with a wonderful project that talks about climate, that presents information to all of us and keeps us informed, and then is incredibly active in the streets. So thank you all for representing the very best of Veterans for Peace.
Can you hear me? Thank you. I am pretty excited today. I'm Ellen Barfield from Chapter 105, the Phil Berrigan Memorial Chapter in Baltimore, Maryland, on stolen Piscataway land. And I'm newly back on the VFP board after some years off. And I'm tremendously excited today to tell you that we've had a delightful challenge grant from our good friend and advisory board member, Ralph Nader. If we can raise $10,000, and we have to do every penny, during this convention in the next 3 days, he will match that. So get out your checkbooks, get out your credit cards. There should be a link up, or it will be pretty much for the whole convention. Just click on it and donate some money. There's even an ad about being a regular donor, and that's very helpful, but every little bit helps. So whatever you can. Thank you so much, and we're so glad you're here.
Thank you so much, Ellen and Susan. So welcome to the opening session, Climate Crisis, Veterans Respond. I'm Janet Weil, a lifetime associate member and a military family member, and I'm your session moderator. Before we get started, a few housekeeping details. If you haven't already, please drop your name and location into the chat. And it's exciting to see people from all over. This session, as you have seen, will be recorded or is being recorded. Please put questions and comments in the chat. If you have a technical issue, please send a direct message to Ellen Davidson, who shows up as Veterans for Peace. She and Sharon are doing our tech today, and we thank them. We will address your questions after the presentations, so feel free to write your questions in the chat at any time. As the hottest summer in recorded history burns and storms to a deadly reckoning, war rages in Eastern Europe and elsewhere, and our hearts go out to those suffering. We are standing up and speaking out for peace. One of our speakers, Miriam Pemberton, has written, in spending decades building national security around military dominance, we have neglected the task of averting climate catastrophe, and we are running out of time. In the Climate Crisis and Militarism Project, we are using our time to stand up for peace and climate justice. Our presenters include veterans of the Korean, Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Iraq neighbors, and our civilian allies. A research fellow at the Institute for Policy Studies, the musical duo, the Irthlingz, a youth activist and poet. Our presenters are diverse because a sustained, effective response to both militarism and climate crisis demands diversity, a wide range of talents, skills, motivations, and perspectives. We are fortunate to have these brilliant and caring people as presenters today. So let's get started. Our first speaker is well known to many of us. Matthew Hoh is the Executive Director of the Eisenhower Media Network, an organization of expert former military, intelligence, and civilian national security officials who seek to reach broad cross-partisan audiences using diverse media outlets, and among the American people more generally, who increasingly sense that U.S. foreign policy is not making them or the world safer. Matt is a former Marine Corps captain, Afghanistan State Department officer, disabled Iraq War veteran, and a senior fellow emeritus with the Center for International Policy. Matt is a prolific writer and speaker about issues of war and peace. Matt serves on advisory boards of many peace organizations, including Veterans for Peace and World Beyond War, and is an associate member of Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. Matt, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Janet. I appreciate this panel, what Veterans for Peace is doing here, everyone who's joining this today. The necessity and urgency of this, I think, is apparent to us all. Before I forget, I want to ask people to bookmark the website for this project, for the Climate Crisis and Militarism Project. Go to the Veterans for Peace website, go to the Take Action tab, scroll down a couple, and you'll see the Climate Crisis and Militarism Project website. Go there, bookmark it, come back, go back to it after we're done here and sign up for their updates, read their resources, see how you can get involved both locally and also nationally and internationally. Because, you know, the question I think that in this position right now where I'm sitting is, why should VFP be involved in climate change efforts? Why should this be a concern to us? Don't we have enough already to be concerned with and to be fighting against and fighting for? I mean, the obvious nature of the climate crisis is just right in front of us. I mean, just today before I came on, just checking the news, looking at the news on my phone, you know, stories about the fires in Hawaii, stories about fires in Canada, those in Greece, you know, the floods, the rains, the storms, again, California and China, the mega drought that the floods and storms and rains in California seem to help, but it didn't help the mega drought that's been consuming the rest of our Southwest for many, many years now. As well, of course, the ongoing drought in East Africa that has just caused enormous human and environmental damage. You know, it gets more complicated too, though, because there was a story today about how those two lakes that they use down the Panama Canal to ensure there's water so that they can move the ships through the canal, well, they haven't got enough rainwater. So they've had to cut shipping out of the canal by 20%. And it doesn't take too much to figure that if they're saying this is going to last for a year, which it might, that reduction or restriction in shipping, what that's going to do to the world's economy, especially as we just came out of the supply chain crisis that the pandemic caused. And so you can see how things like a lack of rainfall someplace in Central America can have really consequential second and third order effects on societies all throughout the world. And then there's also too just the gut-wrenching stuff, right? Another story I saw this morning just popped up, didn't go looking for it because it's there, it's happening. This is so prevalent. The loss of the Empire penguin. You know, thousands upon thousands of their chicks died this year because the ice melted and the chicks can't can't swim basically, and they drown. And if this continues, the emperor penguin will be extinct by the end of this century, along with how many other thousands upon thousands, perhaps millions of species, whether it be plant, insect, or animal. I mean, so the necessity of this conversation, and then of course, well, why us? The link, though, that exists. And it's quite clear the link between militarism and war and climate change. As you're going to hear about this in this webinar, there's lots of information at it. Again, go to the Climate Change Militarism Project website to learn more. But, you know, the U.S. military is the world's largest polluter as an institution. It's the world's biggest emitter of carbon as an institution. It's the larger polluter and carbon emitter than most other nations in the world. And this is just one singular institution. It's also ExxonMobil's best customer. And what is ExxonMobil and the Pentagon's armed contractors have in common, besides that this climate change relationship and this relationship with fossil fuels? Well, they're also two of the most profitable assets owned by Wall Street, right? So you can see how that nexus exists, how that relationship exists. But while we'll get into that, and you'll hear about that, what's also clear is that this relationship between climate change and militarism and war is not just one way. It's a circular or self-reinforcing relationship. Climate change drives militarism and war. And to briefly talk about this, one is, look for examples, issues of how society will be impacted, and then how governments will be pressured by society. This can be driven by food insecurity. This can be driven by migration. This can be driven by infrastructure degradation. There's certainly a lot of evidence out there that the war in Syria, that awful 12-year war in Syria, which is still going on, but that killed over 500,000 people, precipitated the world's largest refugee crisis up until the Ukraine war, was a result of a drought that affected the rural areas of Syria, that pushed people into the Syrian cities. And that is not the sole cause, but one of the causes for the instability that occurs that then leads into that civil war. Lots of other causes too, including, of course, U.S. government machinations. But what you also see too is you see things where resources are going to be fought for. Resources are going to be desired and scrambled for. Water, of course, is one that you would think of right away, the need for water. And you see this, say, in Africa, in terms of the nations along the Nile River and how those upstream have an advantage over those downstream. And you're going to see this all throughout the world. You're also going to see more pressingly things open up that haven't been before. And so many of you may be familiar with this idea that as the Arctic opens, as those sea lanes appear or widen in the Arctic, and it becomes much more accessible, not just for commercial shipping, but also for resource extraction, you're going to see a competition there that we didn't see before. Whereas the competition in the Arctic was limited, now it's going to be full on. But also, too, what you're going to see, and this is a byproduct of some of our efforts to mitigate climate change, is a desire for rare earth minerals. And so as we transition, and rightfully transition, to electric vehicles, to using solar panel, et cetera, of course, everything we do with these gadgets and these computers requires rare earth minerals. You're going to see, and we are seeing, an escalation into those areas by the world's powers competing for them. And of course, the U.S. is foremost in that group. I just want to give you a couple of quotes before we move on. One is from General Laura Richardson, who was the four-star commanding general of United States Southern Command, which has responsibility for Central and South America and the Caribbean. And General Richardson, at the beginning of this year in January, very candidly said the United States must be engaged, and she urged further engagement, which is quite laughable, right? If anyone thinks that the United States over the last couple of years hasn't been fully engaged in the politics and policies of South and Central America, it's quite a brilliant thing to think, right? But this idea, what she expounded upon, and again, quite candidly, was, that there's oil down there, there's fresh water down there, and very importantly, she stressed the rare earth minerals. She went at quite a length to describe how the U.S. needs to step up to make sure that China, Russia, other nations are not the ones in control of the rare earth minerals, particularly the lithium triangle. And if people go back a couple of years, remember there was the coup in Bolivia that a lot of folks traced that coup towards Bolivia's being part of the lithium triangle. Elon Musk famously tweeted after that coup. Elon Musk, of course, head of the world's largest electric vehicle corporation, so very much invested in these rare earth minerals. Elon Musk tweets, "We'll coup whoever we want to coup." And it's not just South America. We see this in Africa as well. If you go back to the second administration of George W. Bush, the first administration of Barack Obama, you see the foundation and then the escalation, the establishment of Africa Command. And I think if you went back to 2004 or 2005, as this thing was getting talked up, and you looked and you said, why is the United States going to create an entirely new military command for Africa? You would find that the answer lies in this desire for rare earth minerals. So I'm going to end it there. Certainly a lot more we could talk about this in terms of how pressing this is, how climate change drives militarism and war, just as militarism and war drive climate change. But I want to go back to this idea that we all need to be involved. And as Veterans for Peace, we need not just be out there doing what we can to mitigate and avert and assimilate to climate change, but also to prevent the militarism and the wars that will come as a consequence because of the changing climate. Again, please go to the Climate Change and Militarism page on the VFP website. Go onto the Take Action tab. I'll also put the link in the chat. And I thank you all for this opportunity to speak to you. Thank everyone for being here, wherever you are. Have a pleasant rest of your morning, afternoon, evening, and enjoy this webinar and the entire VFP convention. And back to you, Janet.
Thank you so much, Matt, and hope you can stay on for questions. We're going to move on now to our next presenter. Miriam Pemberton has worked for decades to redirect our militarized economy toward preventing climate catastrophe. First at the National Commission for Economic Conversion and Disarmament, and now at the Institute for Policy Studies. Her new book, which I'm reading, is 6 Stops on the National Security Tour, Rethinking Warfare Economies. Miriam, please go ahead. Miriam, you're muted.
How about that? Is that good? It's great to be with you all. I am really grateful that Veterans for Peace is working on organizing around climate change, the connection between climate change and militarism. That's what I've been working on for a long time now. And there are lots of ways to go at it, but mainly what I do is look through the lens of budget priorities and industrial policy. That is, what government policy prioritizes in terms of industrial development. So I'll try to flesh that out with a few slides for you now. Okay, can we see the whole? Okay, there we go. There's that book she was talking about, and the question is it possible to turn our militarized economy toward fighting the climate crisis? Next slide. May as well start with the comparison between the United States military budget and the next 9 countries put together. It's actually, this is from 2021, it's actually got worse and going to get worse probably this year. And if we look at the top one in that stack, that is China, we know that the military budget is being, the increase is being promoted as we need to, resist the rise of China. But what we're reading now is that the Chinese economy is in a lot of trouble. And even now it is about, the US is spending about 2.5 times what China is spending. So increasing our military spending, whatever you think about what the China threat might be, increasing our military budget is just simply doesn't make sense. Next slide. So a colleague of mine who runs the National Priorities Project that you may have run into, she's done a rundown of what she calls the militarized portion of the federal government, and she's outlined all the different components of that, starting with Department of Defense, but also looking down, obviously the nuclear weapons complex, foreign military aid, and then we get to veterans benefits. This is, by the way, just the discretionary portion of the budget. So there's discretionary, what Congress votes on every year, and then there are the mandatory expenditures. And so when we talk about veterans benefits, these are just the ones that Congress votes on. They're all obviously a lot of other, a larger portion of mandatory benefits. But this is what's in the militarized federal budget. So then we get down to so-called border protection, which is to say detention and deportation. And so there are all of those components of the budget. And then finally, we get to federal law enforcement. So mass incarceration, DEA, all of those. Not to say that, we shouldn't be spending money on some of these components of the budget. But can we go to the next slide? What she shows is that these components make up 62% of the discretionary federal budget. And then you see all those other little slices for things like energy and environment, education, transportation, and the whole range. So, our budget is skewed toward militarism, and these on the left-hand side are all the priorities that are being neglected. Next slide. So this is, you may have seen this, this is this mountain range, as I call it, is the trajectory of military spending after World War II. And so you see the peaks that are all these wars, plus the Reagan military buildup. And what you notice about this mountain range is that you get these peaks, but after the peak, you never get back to where you were. This is all adjusting for inflation. This is not related to inflation, but after every war, we don't ever come down to where we were beforehand. And if you look at the Reagan buildup, you'll see that we had the biggest drop in military spending, which was obviously caused by the implosion of our Cold War enemy. But you see that that drop didn't last very long, and so the little shelf on the upward trajectory is 9/11. So we were already going steeply upward, and then of course we reached Everest up there, which is the Afghan and Iraq wars. The map hasn't been extended to the present day, or certainly to what's happening with the budget wars this year, but we're probably going to exceed that previous Everest with a new Everest now. Next slide. So in the book, I talk a lot about the various ways that the contractors made sure that that drop in the military budget, which they didn't like at all, was reversed. And so there's a couple different ways we can talk about campaign contributions to key members of the committees that vote on military spending in Congress. But I think the most important thing they did after the Cold War, and they've been doing it for a long time, but they really ramped up their effort to spread contracts as far and as wide across the American landscape as they could. And this is obviously not a recipe for industrial efficiency, but it's certainly a recipe for political protection, which is what they've been buying. So here's we have the F-35 fighter jet, the most expensive boondoggle that the Pentagon has ever funded. The last report from the General Accounting Office found 800 defects in the F-35, but they're already pushing them out, and then they get more money to fix them once they're already out there. So this is a map of those 4 stars. On those 4 states are the only 4 states that do not have a piece of the F-35 fighter jet program. So they have, as I say, bought immense political protection by this means. Next slide. So I decided to go and visit a few of these defense-dependent locations, and this is where I went. Next slide. So here we are at Los Alamos. I went up there on the mesa, which we've all watched in the movies lately, to look at the place where the nuclear age was born and where it is being now perpetuated. Next slide. I also went down to a military base in the poorest quadrant of the state of Arkansas, one of the poorest states. This is where the U.S. stockpiled much of its chemical weapons, stockpiles, and are now and have been storing them. And that was what the community built its economy around, because it was the only thing really going in that town of Pine Bluff, Arkansas. But then in the early 90s came the Chemical Weapons Convention, and the U.S. was required to get rid of all of its stockpiles of chemical weapons. And so now this community mainstay just went away, and they've been struggling ever since to find another way to support economic development in this very poor city. Next slide. This was on an air base in north of LA, the mountains over from LA, and this air base houses, oddly, 3 of the 5 major prime contractors. So Lockheed is there, Boeing is there, and Northrop Grumman is there. And this was Northrop Grumman's music and light show when it unveiled its this new bomber. It was quite the production, but then they just took it back into the hangar because it really isn't ready to be used, and is certainly not needed. It's got all this stealth technology on it that as they've been trying to perfect this stealth technology so that it wouldn't be detectable by radar, but of course the technology doesn't really work, and so these planes can't really, as we once said, go out in the rain. So next slide. I chose the places I visited, for a variety of reasons, to to look at different pieces of the military-industrial complex. But in each case, I was also looking for the potential of that area to get its piece of the green economy. So this is right on that air base with Boeing and Northrop and Lockheed, is a factory that is making the light rail cars for the city of Los Angeles. It's a Japanese company called Kinki Sharyo, and indicating that Los Angeles wants these rail cars, but they couldn't find an American manufacturer to make them. Next slide. I missed. Well, anyway. So there we go. This, I'll be brief. This is my best example of a sword being converted into a plowshare. This was formerly a Lockheed facility. Then it was bought by BAE Systems, another major prime contractor in Binghamton, New York. And the engineers there, when the Cold War was making even Lockheed think about what else they might be able to do besides build weapons platforms. And they got their engineers to work on this, and the engineers figured out how to get a hydraulic system that they'd been working on in a fighter jet and use it and adapt it to run the drivetrain of a hybrid electric bus. And there are now these buses on the streets of New York and Tokyo and London and scores of other places around the world. However, that facility, this bus manufacturing facility is about 5% of what BAE does. Mostly it does weapons platforms still. So these cases, such as this one, are hard to find. I had to work very hard to find this one. So what is really needed to replicate this success story across the country is a real change in industrial policy. So we have a de facto militarized industrial policy created by all of this spending on the military and on private contractors across the country. Let's see, go to the next slide. We have the best green industrial policy that we've ever had through the Inflation Reduction Act. Let's go to the next slide. These are all the things it's done. So this is the beginnings of a change to a climate-focused industrial policy, and a reminder of what our military industrial policy, what its nature is entirely funded by the taxpayers. However, the climate-focused industrial policy, whose beginnings are being created by the Inflation Reduction Act, is using federal money to boost private investment, and that is happening, at a really impressive scale right now. Private sector announced more than 110 billion in new energy manufacturing investments, including 70 billion in electric vehicle supply chain and more than 10 billion in solar manufacturing. Next slide. However, we got to put that, it's a very important program, a very exciting program, but we have to put it in perspective. That little orange slice is the amount of money being invested every year in the Inflation Reduction Act, as opposed to that blue pie, which is the military budget. And in fact, probably this disparity is going to get worse this year. Next slide. I want to say a word about the jobs issue. So obviously, pouring military money into any community is going to create a lot of jobs. That is inevitable. However, a series of studies, some which you may have seen, shows that while it does create a lot of jobs, more money would be created by investing that money in a whole range of other kinds of economic activity. So, education, clean energy, infrastructure, and so on. All of those create more jobs than investing that amount of money in the military. Next slide. So this chart is a little bit hard to read, and I'm sorry about that. I'll just explain. The dotted line across the middle is the national poverty rate, so a little more than 10%. The dark lines are the 20 most defense-dependent states in the country. And next to each dark line are the 3 most defense-dependent counties in that state. And just briefly, what this shows is that while, yes, you pour military money into a community, and you will create a lot of jobs for some people, but this is far from what the contractors would like you to believe, which is the idea that all of this military money creates broad community prosperity. And what this shows is that in about half the cases, those communities that are the most defense dependent in the country have a higher poverty rate than the national average. Next slide. So 3 suggestions for supporters of a climate-focused industrial policy. First would be to advocate for a shift in budget priorities and for boosting this climate-focused industrial investment that the IRA is beginning to create. Second would be, I think people should be pushing their local legislators to push for their community's piece of the IRA pie, saying, what are you doing to get some of this money and to create an alternative economic base to this militarized economic base that far too many communities have. And finally, to push for unionization at local clean technology projects. I think you all know more about this than I do, but it's clear that this is going to have to be a fight, and it's one that is well worth having. So I appreciate the time that you've given me, and I so appreciate the work you're doing, and be happy to take any questions whenever.
Thank you so much, Miriam. You've given us a great overview, both of what we're up against and what we need to do in local communities and across the country. I'm seeing lots of interesting comments in the chat. Folks, please remember to put your questions also in the chat. I know I've got one myself on that just eye-popping prosperity gospel slide, and there's a wealth of information there that Miriam and Matt have both given us. So please do put questions in the chat. Okay, we're going to now have a musical interlude. We are so fortunate to have the Irthlingz Duo with us. Sharon Abreu and Michael Hurwicz, known as the Irthlingz Duo, have been singing together for about 25 years for peace and environmental healing. They've sung in concert with legendary folk singer Pete Seeger and have brought their music to the United Nations, the World Beyond War Conference, and the Ground Zero Center for Nonviolent Action. Sharon has portrayed Veterans for Peace and Climate Crisis and Militarism Steering Committee member Jim Janko in her show, The Climate Monologues. soon to be performed at the University of Pennsylvania. Her new choral work, Peace for All Time, based on President Kennedy's peace speech, was premiered on June 8th of this year. Sharon is active with the JFK Peace Speech Committee and the Climate Crisis and Militarism Project. So Irthlingz Duo, take it away.
Thank you, Janet. It's
Thank you.
really an honor to be here with you all. We're going to do one song, and this song is the one that I wrote for Jim Janko's monologue in the Climate Monologues, and it's called The Carbon Bootprint. Ooh, tune that up a little bit. It's a little flat. We tune, and then we have to tune again. Nothing is more harmful to the earth than preparation for war and war itself. Some talk about a carbon footprint. We all have one, don't you know? But the military's carbon bootprint packs a blow from heel to toe. I feel that bootprint on my backside, pushing me past my comfort zone. It's been wearing me down to the bone, and I know I'm not alone. Nothing is more harmful to the earth than preparation for war and war itself. Carbon bootprint. We are vets, but we're still fighting, 'cause we know that there's a way to heal our wounded planet and cool it off without delay. We fought in foreign countries, firing death from killer drones. Now we must defend our atmosphere and the earth, our only home. Nothing is more harmful to the earth than preparation for war and war itself. Carbon bootprint. As Congress kicks this loaded can down a long and dusty road, the climate's like a landmine about to explode, and the fighter jets are set in suicide mode. Oh, that bootprint's on my backside, carbon bootprint strong and wide. But in this fight for the climate, we're all on the same side. Nothing is more harmful to the earth than preparation for war and war itself. Carbon bootprint.
Wow, thank you. Thank you so much, Irthlingz Duo. And
Thank you.
now I'm so pleased to introduce Aniya Butler. Aniya Butler is a high school senior from Oakland, California, a spoken word poet and organizer. As leader of Youth versus Apocalypse, she helped organize an event of 400 people last November 10th, which targeted participants of COP27 to address the climate crisis, militarism, and environmental racism. The event was in collaboration with Code Pink and Veterans for Peace, and included a march to and rally at a Lockheed Martin office in the San Francisco Financial District. Aniya works to dismantle systems of oppression that cause the climate crisis and to build a world of equity, sustainability, and love. Aniya, please go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Sorry. Can y'all hear me? Okay. Sorry, I'm kind of losing my voice a little bit, but I'm going to try to talk as loud as I can. Very excited to be here with you all. So I'll get into it. Youth versus Apocalypse is a frontline youth-led Bay Area-based group focused on fighting for climate justice through an intersectional approach and uplifting the voices of youth of color. And so we work with a lot of youth and just prioritize that in our work. And we recognize that before approaching a young person about getting involved in the movement in any capacity, we as organizers have to clarify what that movement is about and how it includes the perspectives and experiences of them and their own communities that they identify with. And so a reason why I joined YVA is because of our intersectional approach on the movement and how it influences our strategy when engaging with youth and our demands and targets for actions and campaigns. And part of that intersectional approach is us recognizing and sort of being grounded in that the climate crisis stems from foundational exploitative capitalism and systemic racism, white supremacy, colonialism, patriarchy, and so many other systems of oppression that also fuel the same social injustices that frontline people experience daily. And so just recognizing the connection between those struggles and recognizing the fight for liberation as connected because of those connections. And so, yes, last year, November 11th, was a call to action by an international coalition YVA joined called Choose Action Now. And we were focusing on COP27 happening and sort of just raising awareness about that and organizing actions that were meant to target that. That November 11th was the call to action, but we chose November 10th, which I'll get into a little bit. But before sort of choosing militarism, we wanted to choose a topic that was not like the typical climate topic and something that we could plug young people in to learn more about. And so we knew that the military was going to be a topic that would be discussed at COP27, and the No One is Disposable team, a team that I helped coordinate, along with a lot of other organizers, sort of came together and wanted to highlight the connection between the military and the climate crisis. A lot of folks mentioned like the military focusing on people of color for recruitment. Students talked about seeing recruiting officers in their schools a lot. And just also recognizing a lot of our money goes to the military. Military has a very significant carbon footprint, and a very local example of Bayview and Hunters Point, a Black and Brown community that has been sort of poisoned with toxic radiation caused by the Navy, and still yet to be cleaned up. And so we recognize just all these different connections and different impacts, and we wanted to highlight that. And so that's why we chose to extend our efforts to uplift the cause of, or the connection between the military and the climate crisis. But in addition to sort of just extending that and talking about it, we also wanted to work with groups that were consistently working on these issues, because we recognize that we wouldn't always be working on it. And so it's one thing just to talk about it, but to see the action actually happen after that is something that we also wanted to help influence. And so we reached out to groups Code Pink and Sagarte Land Trust. Sagarte Land Trust unfortunately didn't have capacity, but Code Pink did, and they ended up connecting us with Veterans for Peace. And we all sort of work together. And I know personally for me, I learned a lot from Code Pink and Veterans for Peace, just about the work that has been done in the past with the military. And just, yeah, a lot of the work that's been put in with that I got to share with my team. And we ended up discussing targets of Lockheed Martin and a recruitment office, which we ended up going with for the action, for the March route in San Francisco on November 10th. In the end, we were able to organize 300 to 400 students, largely because we have school-based clubs. And so we're going to the communities and sort of meeting children and students where they're at, and sort of providing them the resources to, one, learn more about how this issue is connected to them, and two, sort of equipping them with like resources and experiences and skill sets that equip them to be able to organize themselves and their peers to be able to come to actions like this. And so we chose November 10th because November 11th was a holiday, and we organized like within the schools. And so school field trips is like a big strategy for us to get students out. So that's why we chose November 10th, because we wanted to strike on a school day so more students could come out. And I think it was a good attendance. But overall, in my experience, it was just a good example of intergenerational community and collaboration. Like I said before, I really got to learn a lot, and so did my peers that I got to work with. And I'm glad that we got to establish and expand those relationships. So yeah, that is a little bit about YVA and just that action and what went into it. I'm now going to be sharing a piece with y'all. I'm a poet. This poem is titled, "This is the Time." This is the time to take the broken pieces from the crumbling foundations, mold them. I am impatient. The time to recognize these failing systems so deeply despised, mold them into what we need them to be, to a world that is just and free. Our leaders do not see that we are on our knees begging for air so we can just breathe. Sit, think, our world being destroyed, hands of people destroying, we are the destroyers. I'm impatient, molding, building a world people deserve to see, time disappearing like people's hope across the globe, people dying because of our leaders' choices. Is this what we are proud to be? This is the time to change things, damaging. Enough damage has been done. It is our turn to show you how we like things run. Oceans rising like my anxiety, increasing heat, increasing my thoughts, I cannot think. Is this really a world you want us to live in? You say I'm so inspirational, sit in a seat of power and still create no change. I don't just want to be inspirational. I want you to do what we demand. Crumbling, molding the truth that we need to know, systems that will help us grow, the people's blood flooding through the streets, gunshots and screams on repeat, the systems our country lie on aren't concrete, war between governments that the people are hidden from. What are we trying to become? We mistake weapons as a protection. We are steel unshielded, the reason concealed, but today it will be revealed, the climate crisis, making the earth's clock tick faster. People with power fulfilled with laughter. But I'm not laughing. We're not laughing. We're not protected. Fossil fuels, cutting down trees, these are the weapons. The probability of our future is less to happen. Every day we sit back and do nothing to solve this climate crisis. We are tired of watching you sit back. You have the power to literally save our lives, but yet you sit there and say our facts are lies. I am impatient. This is the time to make these ugly systems ancient. This is the time, taking the broken pieces, putting them back together with the tape of passion. This is the time to take action. Thank you all so much.
Aniya, thank you. That was so moving. And such a brilliant and poetic follow-up on what Miriam presented. We too are impatient, and we too are taking action. So now we're going to have some intergenerational dialogue between our oldest member and our youngest member of the Climate Crisis and Militarism Project. Wilson, known by one and all in Veterans for Peace as Woody Powell, is a Korea War veteran, a former consultant in hazardous materials management, and the former executive director of Veterans for Peace from 2001 to 2005. Woody founded the War and Environment Working Group in Veterans for Peace, a precursor to the Climate Crisis and Militarism Project. He serves as our mentor and inspiration. And joining Woody is Ian Mooney, a veteran of the U.S. Army and a graduate worker at the University of Kentucky's Philosophy Department. Their research focuses on questions of environmental ethics, police and military abolition, and new political ontologies. In addition to serving on the CCMP steering committee, Ian organizes with UCW Local 3365, the Kentucky Poor People's Campaign, the DSA, and the Red Black Alliance. So Woody and Ian, you are both veterans of U.S. wars in Asia. Woody in the early 1950s in Korea, and Ian in Afghanistan from 2009 to 2010. I'll start by asking you both the same question, and then you can get into your own back and forth. So Woody, starting with you, When did you become aware of war and militarism's impacts on the climate crisis? So please go ahead, Woody. Woody, you're muted.
Okay, am I on board?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. I think I'm going to go back to when I was going into Korea. I went through Japan on a troop train, and I went through Nagasaki. And that was my first instance of seeing what war could do. And when I got to Korea, I was late in that war. I got there in 1952, and there'd been a lot of bombing and blasting away on, and I saw there were hardly any trees left. And I saw these denuded hillsides and the wreckage of the remaining trees that were being swiftly removed to make fuel for people to use. And fast forward, I really became aware of climate change. I think it was when Jim Hansen wrote his report from Columbia University. And at the time, I had become a hazardous materials management consultant, and I had founded an organization called the Gateway Society of Hazardous Materials Managers here in St. Louis. We had a bunch of very qualified people, and it made a huge impact on our organization at that time. So that's when I became most aware of what climate change was doing. I had been aware of ecological problems from just the pollution of the environment, because I'd worked in the steel industry for almost 20 years and seen what that had done, and then done a lot of cleanup work. But climate change, that hit me in I guess it was 88 when Hansen wrote his book. I'm going to kick the ball over to you, Ian.
I'll take it from here.
Okay.
Woody, let me just say first, before any of this, that I can't express the honor that it is for me to be facilitating this discussion with you. Something I hate in my experience as a veteran is when people say to me, "Thank you for your service." It makes me feel ashamed of myself. Like, what was my service but a contribution to the degradation of this planet and its people, especially Afghanistan, and the many people still struggling there to have a life of dignity. But we're speaking now because you've been fighting this degradation for longer than anyone here. You are a champion of peace, justice, and for life on this planet. And I believe that that is service worthy of recognition. So let me say to you, thank you for your service, and that I will do everything I can to take up this service and continue this mission into the future. Thank you.
Ian, I don't deserve that, but I'll accept it.
Well, if you don't, then no one does. So
all right, well, and thank you for your service, and it's going to be so much more significant than mine because you're heading into this storm as it is increasing just exponentially.
yeah, okay. Well, let's talk about that. So I'm here as the youngest member of our committee, and I'm 34. And even once I started taking the threat of climate change and climate degradation seriously, I still assumed that I wouldn't see the worst of it in my life. But this summer was the hottest summer ever recorded. The polar ice caps are rapidly dwindling. Hurricane and tornado seasons are altering, changing in ways that we can't even begin to predict. The Colorado River is drying up, and more. Right now in Kentucky, in Lexington, we've got a heat index of 110 degrees. So climate change is happening now in surprising and terrible ways. And despite that, a lot of people still seem to feel very comfortable denying that it exists entirely, especially people between my age and yours. So I guess my first question is like, what are we supposed to say to people that still feel like you can deny climate change? Like, how do you deal with this? What would you say?
That's a heck of a challenge. You know, I could talk about my youth and the weather conditions of my youth and compare it to now, to people on the street. I spent some time being brought up in Ohio, and I remember the winters in Ohio in the 30s and 40s, early 40s, and they were so much more severe than they are now. And before that, I remember ice skating on the River Thames, as it is called, in Connecticut, when we were living in New London. Little four-bladed ice skates, you know, I was just a little kid, but it iced over, and you could do that then. That hasn't happened for many, many years as the climate has heated up. I could bring those examples to bear when I'm talking to people out of my own personal experience. And I think if we can work from our personal experience in talking to people, I think it carries more weight than just throwing a bunch of statistics at them. What do you think?
I don't know. I think that this is something that I struggle with really personally. You know, I like I said, I don't feel like the youngest member of our committee, but I was listening to Aniya's poem and thinking like, man, I can't imagine what it would be like to still be in high school and have to like write these poems like, hi, can you please take us seriously? We don't want the world to burn anymore. So, you know, I struggle with patience around this, but I guess like, I guess my opinion is, you know, what can you do other than try to meet people with patience and just explain that this is a material issue affecting our lives, that this is changing the way that we inhabit this country. You know, I think of Jim Janko, who we've already mentioned here at this convention, and like listen to him at our meetings discuss how hot it is over there in Arizona. You know, like there's stuff happening that we can just see. And I think that it's important to say like, we've got to start thinking about this now because it's going to be even harder to think about it later, I suppose.
Yes, if we can do it with passion, but without being threatening.
I'm sorry, Woody, I just want to ask you to speak a little louder because people are having a little trouble hearing you. So if you could speak a little louder or move closer to your mic, I'm sure that would help people. Sorry to interrupt.
All right. Am I coming through all right now?
Yeah, I think so. I have another question for you, Woody. Military recruitment is at an all-time low for a lot of different reasons, they say. And although climate concern does seem to be a prominent issue for youths, this isn't always, in fact, maybe it's rarely connected to militarism, arms trade, the kinds of things that we're organizing here in Veterans for Peace. So could you say something about why you think it's important to connect specifically militarism to climate change? And then maybe like, how should we talk to young people today about that connection?
Again, I think you can only convince people of anything if you are drawing on your own personal experience. So I would talk about my ignorance when I was a youth, and you know, freely admit to it, and then tell them how so slowly and inevitably I became aware of what was happening to the planet and what the role of the military was playing in that procedure or that process that is threatening us so devastatingly now.
I think you touched on something really meaningful there about like taking a sense of responsibility. I think that I've heard before in climate organizing this notion of like, well, what we want to say to young people is, oh, well, you better be interested in this because it's your world, and so you're gonna have to live with it. And I don't like that because it implies like, y'all got to take care of this problem that we created. So I agree with you. I think that there's something very meaningful about beginning this discussion with, we understand our role in creating this set of circumstances. We're here to work together to try and move forward through this. This isn't just like youth need to do something or the olds need to do something. This is like a group project. I think that's wise.
Yeah, when we were talking about this, what we were going to say, I thought I should start off with an apology.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I have a lot, my family has a lot to apologize for. I mentioned that Nagasaki disaster. Well, my father worked on that damned atom bomb.
That's a tough legacy. Yeah, I mean, it's like what I said about being thanked for your service. It's like, I took a pretty key role in the way things are now. It's not like I don't want to paper that over, but yeah, it's tough to deal with. And this is a really great segue into my last question, which I think is something that a lot of us can sympathize with. But when I do this organization, it's really exhausting. Like, I hate to read in the news how bad things are and to think about the enormity of this challenge that lies before us and like how much work we're going to have to do before things even get a little better. And it makes me sad. It makes me frustrated. It makes me not eager sometimes to get up and do the work. So like, how have you been able to do this for so long? Like, what keeps you from being too pessimistic about this?
Now you're going to kind of tinge on the metaphysical here, I think.
Oh, well, they already said I'm a philosophy major, so I'm into the metaphysics.
Oh, okay, all right. But I take a very long view sometimes. I can look back quite some distance, but I can also look ahead quite some distance. And I can see that we could completely wipe out our existence on this planet and leave nothing behind, and no one would mourn the loss. I can also see us doing a turnaround and engaging our better natures on a wide enough basis, on a consistent enough basis to actually maybe restore some of the species to this planet that we've already dismissed from the face of this earth. I think something like 60%. But I also, to avoid just getting very upset about everything, I tend to my relationships with my friends and my family and my dear wife of 64 years, treasuring those things. And I think by treasuring those things, I think I can create a vibe, and I don't know. I would just like to see people trying to introduce positive influences into their lives, and at the same time do it with an intense and an earnest awareness of what the hell is happening.
Yeah, my friend speaks my mind. I really appreciate what you said about like using this as a way to connect with family and friends. I remember years ago bumping into Doug Rawlings, who I think is here, and seeing for the first time the VFP logo and being like, okay, wow, there are people who kind of think like me. This is good. And working with the CCMP has been like the first time I think that I've been like, okay, people can if I look and try to find people who care about this, I can find people who are going to understand me. And that's been making dealing with this a lot easier. So I completely agree with you. And you've been helping me with that. So thank you again, Woody.
Well, thank you. Thank you so very much.
Well, thank you both. This has been great. And I think we'll want to circle back around sometime to have more intergenerational dialogue. Yeah, well, as our session is coming toward its conclusion, I'm going to introduce my colleague and friend, Gary Butterfield. Gary was drafted into the U.S. Army during the Vietnam War and then declared as a conscientious objector and opposed the war while in the military. He is resolute in acting on his commitment to peace. He is president of the San Diego Veterans for Peace chapter and currently serves on the steering committee for the CCMP. He is also a member of San Diego 350.org and is keenly interested in the effects of militarism on the climate crisis. Right after Gary speaks, we will go into the question and answer period. Thank you so much for questions that have been put in the chat. We'll get to them in a little bit. And Gary, please go ahead.
Well, thank you all for coming to this first workshop / session of the 2023 VFP National Convention. I second the ask that you contribute to VFP. We would really appreciate what you're doing for us with your donations. But I want to speak now about our session. The theme was choose peace, stand up and speak out. And what I gained from being a member of the Climate Crisis and Militarism Project is that we can no longer do business as usual. People, we have got to change. And the approach we're taking with this CCMP project is we have a 20 to 30 minute presentation via Zoom, a slideshow, if you will. And I know many of you in the audience, I recognize your names from across the country who have seen this. And we know that if you're at this meeting, you're probably an activist and you're probably involved in more than one organization. So we would ask you to help us find opportunities to show this presentation that addresses, if you will, the elephant in the room, the role of the U.S. military in creating the climate crisis. But we do it in a way that appeals to a broad swath of people who are actively concerned already with the climate crisis. They're doing good work locally, but they really, for a variety of reasons, including the fact that the military is not transparent about its emissions nor how it spends money, but that we tie these issues together to educate them about the military's true role so that we can gain allies and amplify our voices when it comes to these twin existential threats. So we appreciate you being here, but we've got an ask of you. Help us find organizations locally. We've done this presentation over 120 times, about a third of those to local VFP chapters and regional meetings. But we feel that every Veterans for Peace member should have an education about how the U.S. military contributes to the climate crisis. We're all in this together, but we've got to get people aware that we can no longer do business as usual. So as Matt suggested, go to our website. There's a lot of information there that has details that you can talk about, but we're not asking you to become an expert on this topic. It's diverse. You've seen how complicated it might be, We're asking you for an opportunity. We want to be in front of your local organization and discuss this with them. Thank you. Janet?
Yes, thank you so much, Gary. So Barry Reish is going to be helping out with the Q&A section. We've gotten several questions and you can still keep dropping them in the chat. Barry, would you please go ahead and read the first question?
Yeah. Am I on?
Yes.
Yeah, so somebody asked, you know, if it would be possible for local governments to be able to keep the money that they spend in the military to use it for local purposes. Somebody asked if that would be possible, or what, you know.
Yeah, and I'd like to start with Miriam Pemberton to address this question. Miriam, please go ahead. And unmute, please. Miriam, please unmute.
There we go. I mean, I would like that to happen. I mean, I think the US government, you know, takes federal taxes and, you know, applies them to federal purposes. And I mean, I don't know. I think we can talk about how much money is going to the military versus is going to other federal purposes. But, you know, state budgets come from state taxes and federal budgets come from federal taxes. So, you know, I haven't, you know, I've been at this a long time and I haven't seen any legislation or movements around trying to reapply that federal money to the states. I mean, there are some programs like you know, they call federalism, which, you know, does spread that money around, but it is national legislators who you know make and federal agencies that make those allocations. So it's a really interesting question that I haven't really thought very well about, as you can see. But you know, I gotta say I don't know how that would work, and I would say that you know, the work we all do to try to talk about budget priorities and talk about spending more of our federal tax dollars on you know, at home rather than toward, you know, military adventures that haven't made us safer. We can absolutely make that case. Whether that could translate into states saying, you know, who would do it? Sorry, I am kind of, I'm not imagining how that could quite work, but if anybody else has ideas, I'd love to hear them.
Okay, great. Let's see, there's a few hands up. Ian, did you want to speak to this question too? And then we've got another question.
Yeah, I'll be quick. You know, like Janet said, I'm a philosophy student, not an economy student or a law student. So, you know, take all this with a grain of salt. But if we're talking about this question of like how to divert military funds, especially the ones governed at a state level rather than at a federal level, but, you know, this applies all across the board, in my opinion. Last year, we talked a little bit about this in the CCMP, but last year in Texas, there was the Texas National Guard unionized, and part of their unionization mission statement was talking about how they wanted their work, their deployments to resist politicization and to safeguard the lives and livelihoods of the people who were serving in the Texas military. And, you know, unionization is kind of hot right now. You know, we're in the hot labor summer. This big UPS contract just happened. This is a really exciting time for US labor. And I think we should be more considerate of how this could be a tool for disrupting militarism in general, but especially for thinking about like how we can combat this materially, both in the sense that we want that budget to go to things more appropriate. Like we want service members maybe to have a say in like how they're getting paid, what's money being spent on, and how we can like draw this down publicly through collective effort. I think that that's something worth all of our organization and to foster when we see it happening, complicated though it may be, for sure.
Okay, Gary, go ahead, but then I do want to get to the next question.
Well, I just briefly want to say we need to get more people in that definition of the word "we" when we want to talk about where we want our money to be spent. And it's been our experience when we do this presentation to climate activist groups, when they see the information such as Miriam shared with her slides at the budget and that $1 trillion pot of money and what it's being spent for, we get a lot of interest on how we could make that money go to more humanitarian issues. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Gary. Mr. Kalsa, and I'm sorry, I'm probably mispronouncing your name, but he had the same question, Miriam, that I had on the slide about the discrepancy between military spending in a state and then in addition, or along with that, I'm drawing the lines of your chart with my hands, high poverty levels. And so he wanted to say, you know, what is the his question was, what is the relationship there? Does the military in some ways cause some of that poverty level? Does it alleviate it? And then I would just add on to it, maybe you can say something about Arizona, because I noticed that the discrepancy in Arizona was the highest. And that really kind of surprised me. So please speak about that particular slide.
Yeah. So, you know, I'd say that I mean, I would say that military contractors, you know, as I showed in the previous slide, they create fewer jobs than other forms of spending, and so you know, they pour lots of money into you know, into communities, and there, you know, the reason, or one of there are a bunch of reasons for why they create so few jobs per dollar compared to these other forms of spending. But one is that military production is very capital intensive as opposed to labor intensive. And so, you know, if you're, you know, concentrating your dollars, your economic development dollars on a form of economic activity that creates the fewest jobs, you know, you are not going to be creating the kind of economic opportunities that lift communities as a whole out of poverty. So, you know, it's not exactly that, you know, they are creating poverty, except that they are, you know, concentrating resources on, you know, on something that doesn't create enough jobs for the community. So when they talk about job creation from military spending, they talk about, you know, direct jobs, meaning the jobs at the plant making the fighter jet, whatever. And then they talk about, you know, indirect jobs that are created, that is, you know, the pizza shop that makes pizza for the workforce, and you know, builds the roads, and you know, all these other forms of indirect investment. But, you know, it's clear to me that this form of economic activity, you know, may be good for certain communities. But this you know, little study I did was trying to you know, say that the military contractors who say, you know, get the military contract, it will be great for your community as a whole, you know, are not being truthful. You know, sometimes that is the case, but frequently it isn't. So it's just not, it's not this reliable a way to you know, kind of lift all boats in a given community.
Right. So Sharon has her hand up, but first, Sharon and Michael, before you ask or say whatever you want to say, Kathy Kelly has a question for you to talk a bit more about how you use the text of President Kennedy's peace speech, which he delivered in the summer of, in June of 1963 in your choral work. So, Sharon, please unmute.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Oh.
Yes. In fact, I'm going to put something into the chat about it too. But yeah, you know, about a year and a half ago, I kind of stumbled upon this group online called the JFK Peace Speech Committee. And I got very inspired because I didn't know, I had never been aware of JFK's commencement address at American University, which he delivered on June 10th, 1963, when I was 3 months old. I wasn't aware of it. Anyway, it's such an important speech, and it could not even be more timely than it is right now. So I got inspired to, as part of my part, to raise public awareness about this speech that is so critical for Americans to know about. I decided to write a choral work, because I'm a choral singer as well as a solo singer and songwriter for a long time. So I took large sections of that peace speech from June 10th, 1963, and I set it to music for chorus and instrumentalists. And we premiered it on June 8th, 2023 here on Orcas Island. But I'm going to put a link in the chat. We have excerpts of it online. I can send people the full version of it. And I would really like to get it into, maybe we can get a discussion of peace into high schools by having high school choruses sing this piece and college choruses. And so, you know, to me, it's like the words are so powerful. But when a speech goes by and you're just, and, you know, like Kennedy is speaking, it is powerful when he speaks it. But when you hear it sung, it can really get into your ear. Like now I have most of the speech memorized because I've sung it, you know. And it should follow people around. It should get into their skin like hymns or commercial jingles, and really raise awareness and the emotional, the critical import of what he's saying comes through in the music. I want to ask Ian. Yes.
Yeah, I'm so sorry to interject, but we've only got a few more minutes, and Barry has a couple questions. So if we can zip through those in the next 3 minutes. Okay, go ahead quickly.
I had a question for Ian. Is it okay to ask it now?
Well, maybe you can email Ian. Sorry, Ian, but I want to get to some of the other folks' questions who've been waiting. Barry, go ahead.
Yeah, I've got a question from Pat Scanlon, wondering with all of these environmental catastrophes that are happening, and the local media does not present it as part of the climate crisis. And so he's just wondering about, you know, what can we do to get the media to focus more attention on the fact that these things are all climate crisis related?
Yeah, who'd like to speak to that?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question one more time?
Yeah, just, you know, each of these environmental disasters, you know, the flooding, the fires, whatever, when the news people, the weather people, whatever, talk about them, they don't ever compare that, or that it's part of the climate crisis. It's part of our changing weather patterns, and they don't report that. They don't report the ramifications of these storms are our lifestyle. So what do we do to combat that?
Matt, would you like to speak to that?
Sure. I think there's a couple ways to look at this. One is, are we reaching out to the media, and are we encouraging them to ensure that climate change is being reported fairly, accurately, and as abundantly as it needs to be? What I think happens is these media organizations, besides their relationship to the fossil fuel companies, the banks, et cetera, but so you have that whole thing where the board of directors for Turner Media are going to the same country club as the guys from ExxonMobil, but then also too, their parent companies are all owned principally by the same banks. So you have that relationship, which we can't dismiss at all. But in terms of when the media does report on climate change, what type of response do they get? Do they get the 135 people on here calling CNN saying, thank you for presenting it this way? Thank you for including climate change information when you're just talking about Tropical Storm Hillary or the Lahaina fires. Are we doing that? Because I can tell you the number of people who call in every time climate change is referenced in the media who are angry about it is lots and lots, right? So you have that type of way to look at it. Or are we doing enough to push and enable and support those who are reporting on climate change, as well as then calling in and saying, hey, you just spoke about these fires. If these fires wouldn't have happened unless there was climate change. The fact that you had a tropical storm, hurricane category 1 in California for the first time in 100 years wouldn't have happened without climate change. Are we pushing that as well? And then finally, to say briefly as well, when we talk about media, what do we define as the media? Who are we talking about? In this case, obviously, I was talking about the legacy establishment corporate media, CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, Wall Street Journal, New York Times. They're very important. They set a standard. They also move the discussion on this. They control the Overton window, et cetera, et cetera. But look at what we're doing here right now. 5 years ago, if we had done this on Zoom, it would have been a catastrophe. The technology just wouldn't have allowed it, right? So this idea of what gives us hope and where we should be putting some focus on and what can we do to make things better, I think a lot of it has got to do with media. And so what can we do to create alternative media, to create media that is not the legacy corporate establishment base that we see, but what do we have in our possession right now, technology-wise, as well as resources and the knowledge to ensure that people receive information via this new alternative media that didn't exist 5 years ago, or at least 10 years ago, right? And what can we do then using that to educate, to inform, to coordinate, to mobilize, right? How does that all fit into this as part of a larger body of climate action that we have to do?
Thank you so much, Matt. I'm a little worried that our tech team is going to be cutting us off any minute, so that's why I started the slideshow with a review of what we've been doing this year. And then I want to remind everybody that on September 17th, there is going to be a huge climate crisis march in New York City. And for the first time in such a march, there will be an anti-militarism hub, and Veterans for Peace, led by Jim Ryan, who's one of our steering committee members, is very involved with that. Also, I think Ellen Barfield and others. So if you can get to New York City for that, and there are so many ways to take action. Thank you all so much for being here, for all your contributions in the chat. And we'll have to follow up because there's plenty more to talk about and a ton to do. So thank you, everybody, and enjoy the rest of the convention.
Thank you, everybody. This was a great start. And I'm going to add my own advertisement. Peace and Planet News is putting out a special print edition for the Climate March. You can order it at peaceandplanetnews.org. It's a paper edition to hand out at the Climate March, which will focus on climate and militarism. So thank you, everybody, and we'll see you at the next workshop.